And good morning, everyone. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of food safety, quality assurance, fantastic products enjoyed by all your customers out in the marketplace. Everyone's happy and fed and satisfied. And if no one says it, Dr. Detwiler and I are going to say it to you here today. Good job. You did a good job. And we appreciate all that you do because a lot of times people don't notice because food safety is just assumed. And we know very, very well that that is not the case. If you're new here, welcome. Pull up a seat. This is the Food Safety Chat Live, and my name is Bryan Armentrout. And every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, and early 7 a.m. where Darin is on the West Coast, we get together and we talk about all things food safety. And what you'll notice about this is not a lecture. This is just an amazing opportunity for me to sit down with an expert, ask him questions, and more importantly, you get the chance to ask him questions as well. So in the comments, we highly encourage you to put in your comments and let us know, and we'll work those into the conversation here today. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is put in where you're at in the world. I am in Loveland, Colorado, and as I referenced with Darin a little bit, I believe you're in California, correct?
That's correct.
How's your weather looking? I mean, you guys have had tons of rain and stuff like that, right?
We have. I'm actually about 15 minutes from where IAFP is going to be held in Long Beach,
Oh, okay.
and it's been raining a little bit, but yesterday was sunny. Had the windows and doors open for a while, and went outside for a bit, so it should be nice.
Nice. And so excellent. Everybody's filing in here this morning. Great to see everybody. So Steve, Francisco, Sonal, Lance, of course, Austin here in the Denver area, and Tim, good to see you.
Yeah.
Keep up the posts on LinkedIn, Tim. I love seeing you traveling around all the different fun places that you get to go to. So I guess I'm kind of living through you as well. Bushra, nice. Welcome, Bushra. Glad that you're here. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is before we jump into the topic, which is, as you know, I love to do, is everybody please join us for a ceremonial sip of your favorite beverage. Cheers. I love that coffee in the morning. And so one of the things, if you ever have the opportunity, and Darin, of course, is a figure here in our community relative to food safety, and he does a lot of work going out speaking at conferences and doing other things, and of course with his consulting company going out and helping companies as well. Make sure and talk with him. And as you'll notice, he has a very interesting past, as you can see from the submarine memorabilia and his mug that he just pulled up there. So if nobody else says this today, Darin, thank you for your service. We all greatly appreciate it. That is just the coolest mug. I love it.
Thank you. This is a technically it's referred to as a shaving mug. Like this is what you would.
Oh, really? You put your
The way they designate these things. This is the one like the cream and the big brush would be in here, kind of a thing. But we all had our various mugs on the submarine, and of course the iconic mug is this one. You know someone is a true submarine veteran if they have this mug. This is a standard submarine mug.
Okay.
This is a prized possession of anyone who is a submarine veteran.
Nice. Now is that U.S. government property I'm seeing there, or
cannot confirm nor deny?
Love it. So, guys, let's dive into our topic because we have a ton to go over here today. So really our topic, and this is something that's been front of mind, and being an election year, we see this everywhere. And it's been very interesting looking at this and starting to analyze how we get our information in society. Because as we all know, it should be easy to get information now, right? We're absolutely deluged with information every single day. But
perhaps that's the problem, though.
Yeah, exactly. Because we have a hard time now telling what's real and what's not, what's been verified, what's somebody making a fake AI generated post and putting words in people's mouths. It's getting really hard to trust what's out there because we're being inundated with so much information.
Well, and one of the things I want to show is that not only are there some pretty significant examples of how a story around food safety can be changed today, but even how it
Mhm.
has changed. You know, last year we had the documentary Poison come out. And one thing that still, sits within my space is that 30 years ago, I was working with television executives to make a TV movie about this event. But ultimately, the project was canceled. And at the time, again, now we have this documentary on Netflix, but 30 years ago, this project was canceled. Their argument was there wasn't enough sex and violence to sell this to the mainstream market,
Yeah.
and that the American audience can't palate a story about food safety, and that literally food safety failures, if you will, need to be more of an issue in order for it to gain media attention. And look where
Mhm.
we are today. We have magazines, we have web pages, we have social media. There's so many different ways in which food safety information and what we're going to show today too is a variety, not just talk about, we're actually going to show the
Yeah.
variety of different ways in which media is dealing with food safety information.
Right. I mean, look at this live stream. The fact that we're able to get on here, broadcast to this community, and talk about unheard of 20, 10 years ago, completely unheard of. And part of this as well is what's coming out of this really is now an understanding and more of a visualization of what's going on relative to these things. And as I'm sure people have heard me talk about this on the chat here a little bit before, is people like Scott Adams from the Dilbert cartoons and things like that is a huge influence student on how those processes work and how the media works in these capacities. And one of the things that he talks about in his books is kind of these bubbles that we get ourselves in. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense in that if you're interested in a particular topic, like food safety, for example, right? You're getting that information, you're seeing this, and you're choosing those type of sources. You're subscribing to your point, Darin. You're subscribing to QA magazine and food safety, and you're following the food. You're following, like what's going on relative to recalls and all these type of things. It used to be the only way you found about recalls was the cork board in the front of the Safeway, where they would put the recalls on there, and who actually ever checked those? But part of this as well is the other side of it, which I think people don't really think about, is there's also information that's being excluded because we're selecting this information or particular viewpoints are being put in front of us. There's a whole nother world of things that we don't see and we don't even realize it.
Well, I think sometimes it's kind of like the cart or the horse. Is it because of what is being selected by the journalists or the media outlet, or is it because of what we choose as our
Mhm.
source of information? I mean, um, there are times where I'm connected to, let's just say there are some older people in our families who, sometimes they'll post things on Facebook. And it always amazes me when someone posts something like 1984 is alive and well. It's like, come on, it's 2024. Heard that one a long time ago. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
what were you watching or what were you reading that prompted you to start, writing things about that? But we're in a world today where you know, it's not just consumers. I mean, politicians that live. It's kind of funny. I saw something just in passing, and here you have these senators are like, well, I have a podcast 3 times a week where I talk with blah blah blah. It's like, dude, you're an elected official and you're advertising your podcast on CNN. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay. I guess it's, and yet there's other elected officials that are scrutinized for being too close to their constituents by
Mhm.
having a TikTok video every once in a while. It's like it's just a strange world when you realize that with our 24-hour news cycle, when that was big, when CNN, and you think, wow, it's never going to get more in our face than this. Well, in
Mhm.
addition to the 24-hour news cycle, you got the people that are just going off and creating their own media channels through social media. So again, there's just so many different ways in which people are putting information out, and
Yeah.
at the same time, there's a lot of different ways that people are getting their information. And
Mhm.
I believe that sometimes it's like, well, wait, what's the real story? What's the full
Right.
story on this issue that's impacting, in this case, consumers?
Exactly. Well, and part of this is it's a double-edged sword. So in the past, we had very limited resources that we could go to. Like when I was growing up a kid, right? It was the three networks and maybe a local station or something. That was it. And now you have all these different sources that are competing for your attention. And
Right.
that can also bring out a lot of bad behavior because we see these videos with these influencers, right? These kids doing these type of things, going out and doing goofy stuff in public just to get the attention and get the clicks. Or you'll be going through your feed, right? You're reading through Twitter or whatever. And to me, I've learned now to kind of tune these out because I know it's going to let me down. Is you get this headline like so and so demolishes whatever, and it's like, okay, well, I know that's clickbait, right? So you don't click on those things, and you kind of put in these self filters relative to these sources because you have to. There's no way you could keep up on all this information. And what's funny is it's kind of a demonstration of these kind of these bubbles that we build in. It's funny because I'll be looking at my phone and looking at information. My wife will be on her phone. I'm sure this has happened to you too, Darin. Is I'll see something on there that catches my eye. I'm like, hey, take a look at this. And almost every single time she say, yeah, I saw that 5 minutes ago. And it's
Yeah.
just this, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty weird too when, like I'll see something on social media and I'll go over to CNN to see if it's on um, on their splash page, and sometimes it's like even on CNN, I'm not saying that CNN is the only media out there, but I'm just saying, CNN is what I go to.
Mhm.
It's harder and harder to tell the difference between an actual like news story and what's a paid advertisement down, if you keep scrolling down on CNN, and it's just a reality. And I don't think in some cases it's necessarily like a deliberate fault of the media in some cases. I think you have to take it for what it is and realize that um, over the past 3 decades, a um, now we have social media. Now we have news that is in different formats. Now we are different mindset in terms of being consumer. And I think that today's consumers are wanting to be more engaged, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that again, I'm talking just about food, but I could be talking about other areas, other sectors as well. I think that the American consumer today sees their food money as on the same level in terms of their power to vote.
Mhm.
If I don't like this company, I'll go to that company. If I don't like this grocery
Yeah.
store, I'll go to that grocery store. If I don't like this restaurant, I'll go to that restaurant. If I don't like this brand, I'll buy that brand. If I don't like this, I'll do this. And in a way, it's kind of like if I don't like their practices, if I don't like their politics. I mean, look at there's people that talk about like, oh, this coffee place either allows or doesn't allow breastfeeding, or does allow or doesn't allow people to bring guns in, or does allow doesn't allow for that, or they support LGBTQ or not, or they contribute political campaign money to this or that. Those things have nothing to do with food safety or quality,
Yeah.
but people say, well, why would I give money to this company? Why would I give money to this person when I could just go to the next place over? So I know we don't necessarily say these words, but I think that that is how we, with food being so much more expensive today than, you and I remembered back from when we were young pups. Um, it's not just the price of the food or the value of the food, but it's also the value of our deciding to hand over that money that now we start to think about. Like, if I
Mhm.
don't believe in the politics of a company, why would I give them $5 for, for one French fry these days?
Yeah.
And I think that we start to see that more.
No, that's a fantastic point. Because when we were growing up, companies had no, or at least they didn't advertise any political agenda, right? They were just like, "Hey, buy our stuff. Hi, we're Kellogg's and we make awesome cereal. Come buy our cereal." And the biggest decision my mom had at the store, and we would try and influence this as kids, was the generic store brand versus, the Kellogg's Sugar Smacks. And, oh, come on, mom, let's get the Kellogg. No, that costs, that was the big decision. You didn't have to go out and do all these researchings. And so it's kind of flipped, right? In that, and with marketing and things like this, it almost seems like, companies are niching. Right? It used to be, okay, we're going to produce a product that meets the needs of the vast majority of people. We can sell a whole lot of it. Let's figure out what people want in that capacity. Now it's, to your point, is, okay, we're going to create a low fat, gluten-free, ethically sourced, plant-based milk product that supports the local community, right? And on and on and
Yeah,
on.
but it even gets at one level deeper. There's what you just described. There'll be two companies that make that, but one company has a better reputation in terms of giving back to the environment, perhaps, whereas another company just got fined by the federal government for violating child labor laws.
Yeah.
And that's our reality today. We have companies that it's been pretty big news of late. The whole idea of teenagers being hired to clean, after hours in processing plants, or companies that, again, otherwise they sound great on paper, but if you really dig into it, there's a long history of violating this law, that law, this child labor law, or this whatever it is. And that stuff is coming out more and more now, and I think people are starting to take that into consideration, and that's what's problematic. Why don't we have a good example here that is not even like ominous or anything. It's just the difference between two areas of newspaper. Can you bring up that first slide?
Yeah, absolutely. Boop.
So here, this was not my collection. This is so there was a researcher from the Ohio State University, and she collected all of the newspaper. Basically, she had all the citations for newspaper headlines from the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, dealing with the Jack in the Box 1993 E. coli outbreak. And so what you see here is a speech bubble, and these are the keywords. So, like, they took out the words of, the, and, that kind of stuff. So these are the keywords from those headlines from those three major national newspapers. And the larger the word, the more often it was used.
Right.
So now let's bring up the comparison. So here is, I had collected all of the Seattle Times, Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and Bellingham Herald. These are the local and state newspapers. The same exact topic, the same exact period of time. And again, these are just the keywords from the headlines. Now, Bryan, and I hope the people who are joining us, we can put some comments. Let's do this. Let's let the folks online comment as, can you tell me, what do you see as the difference between if you got your information from a national newspaper or from a local newspaper, and you're trying to figure out what's going on with this Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak? What are some of the differences you see? Which one do you think has something more than the other? So it's been a few minutes.
Oh, it's like Darin got disconnected here, so hopefully Darin will be able to join us back here shortly. So in the meantime, while we're waiting, throw in the comments here. Between those two, what do you see as some of the key things that stick out as differences here? So for me, one of the bigger ones is the fact that on the local is E. coli. Welcome back. Oh, still some problems there. Let's see. So Duncan points out here that national's more brand oriented, the state's more humanistic. Absolutely, that's a good point. I like that one. Francisco, impact on sales. Yeah, definitely. Sanal, national is more high levels, more specific. Yeah, that's a good point. So the local is much more. Yeah. So So we have Darin here, right? Detwiler. Also his son, who tragically lost his life in this issue with Jack in the Box. On the national, you don't even see the national. You don't even see the name of the company. What kind of strikes me as well too is on the national, how a lot of the keywords that we look as for food safety, how small they are, is infection, for example. Welcome back,
Well,
Darren. Can you hear us?
yes, can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely. Great. Yeah, we're just going over here. We're getting some fantastic comments here relative to the difference between the two. Um, Interesting take here as well, here from Francisco as well. Lost him again. So a more honest presentation at the local level. Yeah, it's more specific. Absolutely. The trust factor. Interesting. And Duncan, more product on national, more human impact on state. Yep, absolutely. So specifying the age groups, parents versus toddler. Good point, Bushra. Now think about these in terms of the bubbles that we were talking about as well. So if you're not part of the local scene, right? If you're not in Seattle looking at this information, these details are missed, right? So if you're looking at this in the New York Times, all you know is that okay, there was an outbreak with some burgers at Jack in the Box. Okay, Darren's trying to get back in here. It's not working so far. Let's see. So Duncan says the narrative for national makes a villain out of the product and the brand, while the state narrative makes a victim out of the consumer. Good comment. Good comment. So I keep seeing that Darren's trying to get in here, but he's not able to. Maybe it's the media organizations blocking Darren's comments. Let's see here. So part of this as well is from my notes as we're waiting for Darren to get back on here as well, is the motivations of these particular groups relative to these type of things as well. So influencers, we talked about these. What about groups that have an agenda? So you may be an organization that, let's say, doesn't like meat, and so you send agents in to try and find information at a meat packing plant or something like this that you don't agree with, and you're going to be slanting that story in the direction that you need it to go in. And that's always really weird when those things happen. Let's see here. And so part of this is you need to take those things into consideration when you're looking at these type of risks and the difference on those and what those groups are bringing. Welcome back, Dr. Detwiler.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you great. Everybody else can hear. Give us a okay that you can hear Darren in the comments there. So we were just going over the really good insights here on the differences between those two different communities and what you're seeing and how that relates to how you process the information.
I hold on a second. I don't know why I have to change. I had to change my camera here, and now I'm looking at this camera. But I'm not going to change anything because apparently this is whatever is a problem is at the root of why I'm not staying in. So we'll stay here, even though it's a little different. So I apologize for that. Yeah. So I don't think I want to blame the journalists. I think that it's just the nature of it. If we were to look at let's go to the next slide. Hopefully going to the slide is not the problem here. If we go to the next slide, let's look at some of the reasons here. You know, we're aware of the fact that there's a bias chart, the idea of the difference between liberal and conservative newspapers and TV stations and media sites. So we can have a look at how ideology changes and extramedial forces, organization. You know, I mean, I talk with people from the national desk, the business desk, the crime desk, the food desk, the city desk, all these different desks. They all have a different kind of an agenda or background, if you will, in terms of covering stories. over the last 3 decades, we can also look at just the sheer number of newspapers that either were consolidated or
Are just gone.
sure.
Yeah.
They're gone, or they shifted from in print to digital only.
Yeah.
And then there's the fact of there's only so many remaining journalists that really specialize in food safety, food politics
Mhm.
uh, out there. So it becomes more and more of a challenge of that. If we go to the next slide, um, I find this to be really interesting when we look at the way things are framed. Now, imagine you are either a consumer or you work at a fast food restaurant that's having an issue. These are examples of headlines from the Chipotle outbreaks. And if you start looking at at Archie Carroll's Period of Corporate Social Responsibility, you can find examples of where they're talking about the outbreak. They're talking about this period of time during these outbreaks with Chipotle, for instance, and they're talking about it from an economic frame, right? So on Wall Street, Chipotle's recovery is nearly complete. A
Mhm.
legal frame, Chipotle agrees to pay 25 million penalty for those 2015 2018 outbreaks. Ethical, questioning Chipotle's leadership and their trust, and even the idea of some philanthropic view, looking at things they're doing outside of it. But again, let's take another framework. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, same period of time, same period of time here. Um, what we have is here's articles that are appealing to their readers. This is to consumers and to workforce, their physiological needs or their safety and security, right? Sales
Mhm.
decline causing layoffs. Social needs, Chipotle brings families together with free kids' meals on Sundays. Esteem, the idea of paying for tuition, and even self actualization, the idea of going from, dishwasher to restaurant owner kind of a deal. So imagine trying to get information from, and these are not, I mean, New York Times, NPR, major media resources. It's just how different, like, hey, write a story about Chipotle. That's kind of an open ended prompt, in terms of how do you attack that. So the last slide on this series, the next one here, when you pit, um, and it looks like my graphic at the top there got messed up somehow. That's interesting. It was saying, what was it saying? It was saying the firm up top on top of on the left,
Uh-huh.
and on the right at the top it was saying consumer there. But the point being here is that there's a conflict here between the responsibilities of the leadership within the industry and the needs of the consumer or even the worker. They don't necessarily align equally. Some of these needs of people are not necessarily economic or legal or ethical or philanthropic,
Mhm.
um, or the economic responsibilities of a company. Well, they don't really have much to do in most cases with human needs. There are some things with legal responsibilities, especially like, OSHA and, child labor laws and things like that, regulatory compliance, things like that. But, then ethical and philanthropic, there's no laws. That's why it's called ethical and philanthropic in terms of meeting those needs. So you look at it again in terms of how media is framing some of these stories. Um, but, it's not just media. Let's take a look at that next slide. Where are people getting their information? We have to realize that with social media, some people are just passive. They're just looking to get the information. They may become a friend or fan or follower of someone. But as we move deeper down the funnel, right, we get people becoming more active. They're subscribing. They're essentially saying, I agree with this. I support this.
Mhm.
I'll even contribute to, buy a membership or whatever. But then we get deeper down into that generative where people are becoming more advocates and doing things. This is where we see things like, I have a couple examples down there, posting Yelp reviews or even Amazon reviews. And the third icon at the bottom right is people generating, crowdsourced information about their experiences, about food safety failures, about illness. And there's more and more research that is showing that, in fact, there was I think 10 years ago, 10 years ago, there was a research done by Columbia University that found, they went through this very scientific process in New York City looking at Yelp reviews, that found not only 16 cases that were verified through the research, 16 cases of sick people, people that got sick from food safety failure, um, and that were not reported to the county or state health department. But there were 3 entire outbreaks where multiple people were sick that the county and state health department had no idea about.
Mm.
And some more recent research is showing that in terms of norovirus, that the crowdsourced data through social media regarding norovirus is faster than what health officials are able to do on their end, because of various limitations. So we
Mm.
have to take into consideration the fact that not only is it, social media is how people are getting more information, but it's also how they're generating information and becoming more involved as a stakeholder, in this case with food.
Yeah, so a couple of observations here is, so for example, as food safety professionals who are steeped in these type of activities all the time, looking at this inverted pyramid, right? We're down there in the advocate space. And so part of our challenge then is working our way back up through it so that we can communicate with the public who in general toward these type of things are passive, right? So until it impacts them, they're really not paying attention. Now, juxtapose that with someone, let's say, who has a child who has a severe allergic reaction to peanuts or something. And if your family and your safety is directly impacted, you're going to be down in that advocate area very quickly and start pushing companies then to implement programs and procedures to protect your interests in those areas. So I think maybe this kind of links back to what we were talking about earlier with companies then going after all these different type of certifications and different type of processes to try and satisfy those different type of audiences and creating this high level of complexity relative to those products and their manufacturing, looking at it from our viewpoint as food manufacturers. And this proliferation of information is making this easier and easier to do.
I think too that I'm going to make an assumption. You, for instance, Brian, you have other rooms in your house, and you
Correct.
can't be in every room at all times. You can't be in 2 places at the same time, but you can recognize that those other rooms exist.
Mhm.
I think that we have to understand and take into consideration that I'm going to hold this. Um, I'm going to hold to 4. I'm going to say there's four rooms in the house of food safety, if you will, right? The first one, it's kind of like this funnel here, right? There's awareness, right? We just want to make sure people are aware of something. And that's how we communicate in that mode. We're just making sure that people are aware of this. Be aware of this.
Mhm.
That's all we want. Just be aware. But then there's allies, right? The idea of I'll support you, or I recognize you. I want to validate you. I want to validate your work. I want to see if I can, make sure that you're supported. And this is where we talk about like friends, fans, followers, I guess, in the social media aspect of it, right? But
Yeah.
the idea of it's a little bit more than just that kind of extremely passive, just being aware.
Yeah.
The third one is being an advocate, right? That idea of prioritizing, of sharing, of doing different things. to really, go beyond just people being aware and being an ally. Um, and then the highest level though is an activist. And I know that sounds like a very extreme kind of a word, but an activist is definitely someone who is going to, this is what they are literally going on to the hill to wave a sign and to do this.
Mhm.
Here's the way I look at it. It's as if all these four elements exist in terms of either how people are looking for information, how we are connecting to other people, or how we are communicating on certain issues. But I think about it in terms of like sustainability. Like someone can't be an activist 24/7 for 3 decades. It's just not possible, right?
Mhm.
You have to sometimes just focus on the awareness or just focus on the ally or just focus on the advocate elements. And there's a lot of people I even recognize in the chat here, and I know them from different hats, if you will, different hats that they wear. And I see sometimes when they go to, sometimes they're just being, they're communicating awareness or information to help with awareness, but other times, even just joining on here, that's part of being an ally, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think we have to take that in consideration. Not everyone is looking for the same information or for the same purpose, but we
Right.
have to make sure that we keep in mind that, and this is one of the things I've learned over 3 decades. When I immediately after my son's death, I guess I thought of food safety as a destination. Like,
Mhm.
I'll only be happy when there's no more of this. When E. coli doesn't exist anymore, when people don't, get sick from E. coli. And, that's not uncommon for someone who's gone through a loss to think I want to, think of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It's they didn't want to just decrease the number. They wanted it, ultimately to, there's no more drunk driving. There's no more deaths from drunk driving, right? But I think they have to realize that, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And
Mhm.
that with that journey, any improvement is better. And you have to work for that improvement. So I think that, again, it's not a destination. Food safety is more of a journey. And along that journey, we have to look at the passive, active, and generative way that people are using social media or they're using media in general. And we have to realize that some people at some point are just going to be an awareness or ally, or in other points they might in their journey they may be activists or advocates, but that doesn't stop us from continuing to communicate and do the work that we do.
Mhm. No, that's a good point. This is something as food safety technical people, and I think Duncan brings up a good point here relative to this, is figuring out your target audience. To your point, people move. You're in different areas at different points, and one of the things that we need to understand as food safety professionals is that there is an element of marketing associated with this on how we speak to people. And we all know this from our experience in production facilities. You don't talk about food safety the same way on the floor that you do with your lead scientist. Those are different conversations. And you have to understand your target audience relative to what's the most effective way to communicate that information. And as Francisco was saying here, it's kind of a good example here. I like this because um, posting on restaurants, the score that restaurant received in the last audit, right? Did they get an A or a B, or were they somewhere down that list?
Or they
And
didn't get a happy face or a green, or there's different ways of communicating it. But
yeah,
we're also in a world where look what was going on in what was it, Lewiston, Maine, where a restaurant gets shut down by a health inspector because of a rodent and roach problem or something like that, and now they're taking active steps to basically defund the restaurant inspector, kind of a deal. So I don't like what you did to my restaurant, even though I was the one causing the problem or not correcting the problem. And so kill the messenger, kind
yeah,
of a deal. I think that, a flip side of this is, uh, Bryan, I know, and I know Austin and Corey and some other folks on the call here. Um, we've heard legislators say things like, America has the safest food supply in the world, right?
Maybe.
Yeah. You don't say that to grieving mother, a grieving
No.
parents. I'm sorry you lost your child, but America has the safest food supply in the world. That's a completely empty statement kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
you got to think about what you're saying in terms of food safety. There
Mhm.
are times where I'm at a restaurant because I travel a great deal when I go and speak different places, and I've had to I've had to say, hey, there's a problem with this food, this taco. The meat is red. It's so raw, it's red. And uh, um, I'll ask the waitress, for instance, you know, can you get me can you bring to the table? I'd like to talk to the person in charge. And the person in charge starts making all these excuses. Oh, well, maybe it's too thick. Maybe it's the light at the table or whatever. And I'm like, no, 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 no. This meat is uncooked. You can see this. It's clear that it's not cooked enough. And it comes down to the fact of you either don't care or you don't know,
Mhm.
or whoever's in the kitchen, they don't know any better or they don't care. There really is no other explanation for it. So it's like, but I can't be this jerk, right? I can't really be this, I'm mad at you, I'm yelling at you. That's not perceived well by people, when you're trying to tell them this. So it's it's um it's an interesting balancing act between being honest and getting information and sometimes making sure you're taken seriously
Right.
and the gravity of the issue is communicated, but at the same time it's like you got to stay in your lane, right? And that's if I'm talking to someone who's messed up, who's failed in there. So
Yeah.
it's really, when I talk to people who work in like a state environmental health agency, or they work with the FDA or wherever they work with in terms of food safety, I think one of the number one things I hear is just how difficult it is to communicate, especially when you're competing against social media and the newspapers and political pressures from different angles, and um, just all these different issues. Um, yeah, I see, Francisco. The issue is that the consumer did not order undercooked beef. Very good point.
Yeah.
Um, whatever happened to the customer is always right. Remember that phrase? It's as if we've outgrown that, or we've thrown that out the window, and it becomes an interesting challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Now, here was something that I noticed on your slides for this presentation, Darren, which are awesome, by the way, is going through this example here with the headlines from Chipotle. Is one of the things that I see here very clearly is all of this external communication through these issues is focused on the top of that pyramid. It's not focused on what we would be looking at for food safety people, right? So, for example, here, okay, um, physiological needs, air, food, shelter, and these type of things on the Maslow scale. What is Chipotle doing for food safety, right? Because that's what matters. You guys had a massive failure on food safety. So I would want to see something along the lines, what is Chipotle doing in restaurants to ensure that all of these elements are in place to have a good product, safety and security, these type of things, right? But to your point, when I'm thinking in those terms, as we then look at this, I'm thinking of it from an advocacy standpoint and not a public standpoint. So the public would say, okay, I'm interested in this restaurant score ABC, happy face, smiley face, whatever. Where I'm looking at it more from a technical aspect, and that's not necessarily the right way to communicate to the public.
So I'm going to throw one more wrench into this conversation, and that about 20 years after, I think it was nearly 20 years after, it was 2003, so 1993. No, 2013. Sorry,
Mhm.
2013. Somewhere in the 2013 area, talking with journalists, come to find out that during the events of 1993, um, it was every night. It was, I mean, it was every ABC, NBC, CBS affiliate. Every day there was news articles on the outbreak, the outbreak, the outbreak, the outbreak. Um, um, and if you weren't around, then it's kind of like the news coverage we saw for the pandemic, right? It was like,
Yeah.
it was never ending. So anyway, this person from one of the affiliates shared that they actually got communication. They got a letter from one of their major sponsors who was not Jack in the Box, but was another hamburger restaurant, and basically said that this continued coverage of this outbreak, even though it's for another company, it's impacting our sales. And if you don't cut back on this coverage, we're going to pull our sponsorship. You know,
Ooh.
the 11 o'clock news is brought to you by, well, it would not be by us if you continue to cover on this because it's impacting our bottom line.
Mm.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Media outlets being impacted by how coverage of what's going on in this world could impact their advertising dollars, their sponsorship from businesses.
Huh. That's a good point. And I mean, look at the so-called ag gag bills that came out of all of that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
You're not
exactly.
allowed to speak ill of our industry in our state, or we're going to take you to court.
Yeah, yeah. And what's crazy is how many of, well, not only how many of those got passed, but um, yeah, Tim brings up a good point. When one company has a recall, it affects the entire industry. You
Yeah.
know, it's crazy when you look at the fact that, you know, either A, the romaine lettuce outbreaks, even though it was from a specific, couple of companies from a specific couple areas, well, no one knows what company their lettuce is from. So it impacted all of the leafy green industry, right?
Yeah.
There's recalls where, let's say, hot dogs from some company are part of a recall, and the grocery store ends up reporting that they've got a ton of meat recall or returned to them, even though it wasn't from that company.
Yeah.
Um, if there's, even I mentioned earlier Chipotle, it wasn't just Chipotle; it was the entire Mexican food, fast food industry that was suffering during that period of time.
Right.
Um, and even beyond Mexican food, just again, it's like I'm glad that Tim brought that up. It is something where it's a significant ripple effect beyond just one brand, if you will.
Yeah, and it's exactly what we talk about here. Food safety is not a point of competition because up on this pyramid at the top with this passive group, they're only looking at this kind of, right? They see a headline on the news or something like this. We were talking earlier as we were preparing for this chat about sprouts, right? So
Mhm.
that's one of these things where it's like, oh my goodness, sprouts are bad. I'm never going to eat sprouts. But you had a very interesting encounter on that.
Yeah, and I'm doing a presentation on this next week, and actually the week after that as well. Whereas, after at the end of the documentary, I was asked what are the foods that I avoid, and I mentioned cantaloupe, the bag salads, and sprouts. And one of the surprising outcomes is I got contacted by a sprouts company, and they said, "Hey, we want to invite you up here to Northern California to come see our operation and show you and show you the test results in terms of how most people think there's only one kind of sprouts, but there's actually two kinds of sprouts. And look at our way of doing sprouts. Their entire operation is at below 40 degrees. And
Mhm.
they've had test after test after test that shows that not only does it slow down, but actually reverses um, um, the counts in terms of E. coli or other pathogens, and how safe their process is. And that when around 2012, somewhere in that area, when major grocery stores were kicking out sprouts off of their shelves, only their brand was let back into the grocery stores because of the test results and their process. And so it becomes an issue of understanding that, okay, sprouts from this way of doing it are different than those ways, than that way of doing sprouts, the more traditional way of doing sprouts. And right now, talking, within this industry, there are sprouts that are made that are, again, what they do is they grow them in these rotating cylinders, kind of like a front load washing machine kind of a deal. And there's so much water, and all the water sprayed into this is at 70 degrees because it's optimal for growing. And this is one of the reasons why we continue to have outbreaks over and over again with those more traditional sprouts. But the thing that's most confusing is, or not confusing, but frustrating, is that the traditional way that's proven to be unsafe can get certified organic. And
Mhm.
there's many grocery stores that, oh, we're going to get this company's product because it's organic. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's also unsafe.
Right.
So, are you going on the it's proven to be safe validation, or are you going on the but they got an organic certification? So again, how these things are communicated, and the fact that even many consumers associate organic with safe. It's like
Mhm.
there's no clear connection between certified organic and it being inherently safe,
Right.
kind of a deal. So it becomes, these are the words, we've seen things, right? We saw how Chipotle, when they had their outbreak, right? It was food with integrity. That was their campaign. What does that mean,
Yeah.
right? Clean food. We serve clean food. What does that mean? How about validated safe, tested to be safe? I'll believe those words, show me the
Right.
proof there. But there's a lot of words out there. People assume that organic is safe. People, I guess, are supposed to assume that clean food is safe. There's a lot of, it's like marketing and PR people come up with all these new ways of trying to get around. Just make it safe and
Right.
communicate that.
Right. I mean, yeah. So you have this linkage up in this passive area that people make, and then that becomes very hard to break. And I think this kind of gets into what Wanda was mentioning here relative to how the businesses function and things like this, which brings us to the next level of the conversation, which I think is then the fascinating piece for everybody that's on this call. And how do we do these things in food safety? Because if you're in an industry, Darin, that is damaged by public reputation, so sprouts, or as we mentioned earlier, romaine lettuce, things of this nature, it may be in your best interest within that company to begin touting these type of differentiating factors relative to food safety that make your product safer. And I would imagine at the Sprouts company, right? If you're in charge of food safety at the Sprouts company, this is something you should be trumpeting, right? Why our sprouts are safe. Right? You don't need to dump on everybody else. You can just go out there and start explaining these type of things and talking to that public audience. And
Well,
that's a big hill.
it's like you're reading my playbook, because I told this company that the last thing they want to do is go attack the organic industry. Um, Talk about a way of unleashing a world of problems there. Um, um, uh, you know, a lot of people think that the gun lobby is huge. The food lobby is way bigger than
Oh yeah.
the gun lobby, and the people that support the organic food. And I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that there are pressures, there are forces, there are dollars, there are people, and if you were to, again, like, go against the organic farming or the organic produce or whatever industry, and that's not even the point. The point is here: show that you are safe. You don't have to put down organic to show that you're safe.
Mhm.
And Duncan brought up superfood. Don't 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 tout yourself as a superfood unless you can really prove it. It's so easy to throw these words out there. Again, I still laugh at food with integrity. Talk about a crazy thing. That's like, I love the tacos from this restaurant because they make me think of jazz. Well, what's that have to do with food safety?
Yeah,
Um,
nothing.
I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but that's essentially what they're saying. They're throwing a word out there that has nothing to do with a critical a critical component of food safety.
Yeah.
But we're sold these things. We're sold these pieces of information. I know we're running out of time, but I want to show you uh, at least the next two slides very quickly. One is that in this is a theoretical model that most companies, while there are companies that will take action after an incident, after a crisis, over time, what you usually were finding was that most companies were willing to tolerate risks until there were changes in litigation or legislation, essentially until there were court cases that proved that they had to do something different.
Right.
And of course, the longer you tolerate that risk, you have less options to mitigate and you're just increasing liabilities. But the next slide shows that what we have seen over the last 3 decades is that this curve is starting to shift a little bit more to the left there. With the, I want to credit social media for doing this because it's not just that stakeholder expectations have increased, but it's more along the lines of the fact that consumers today are considered stakeholders more so than ever before. In the
Mm.
past, it was just if you worked for the company and you were in the C suite, or if you owned stock, major stock in the company, you were a stakeholder. Today, consumers are aware of information, they are generating information, they're having significant pressure and impact on a company's reputation, and that consumers are considered to be stakeholders more so than ever before. We can look at the daily harvest issue we had recently, where you had social media was looked at as the platform to advertise until people were getting sick and they were hospitalized and even having surgery. And then all of a sudden, those social media influencers were communicating the exact opposite kind of information that that company wanted to have put out there. And we can see this as a growing issue more and more in terms of how people via social media are being more engaged and active and generative in terms of being stakeholders. And those
Uh,
pressures are now causing companies to act sooner, which of course is better because
yeah.
that means they have more options to mitigate these issues and they could ideally, deal with less, if not zero, liabilities.
Yeah, that's a good point. I recently saw a post from Frank Giannis on Twitter. So of course, right now we're going through this whole thing with applesauce and high levels of heavy metal contaminants. And the company essentially was saying, "Well, this isn't our fault. This came from the supplier." And Frank Giannis, very publicly on there, and to his credit, and I agree with him, was shame on you. This is your problem too.
Yeah.
You approved the supplier. It's your responsibility to control that relationship. You cannot pass this on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good for him.
So, back to the beginning when you mentioned how I was in the Navy and had some Navy submarine stuff. There is a very famous person within the historical. He's no longer with us, but Admiral Hyman Rickover. He was in charge of the Navy nuclear power program, and essentially one of those things he said was that if you are someone who has responsibility, you cannot transfer that responsibility to someone else, and you never have that responsibility. So essentially, what he's saying is you can't outsource or give over to a third party responsibility. Your name is on it, your label, your reputation. If it's benefiting from it, then when it is being impacted by it, you don't blame someone else.
Yeah. Exactly. Boeing recently did that as well and said, yeah,
Yeah,
we had doors come off our plane. That was a supplier issue. No, that's a Boeing failure.
yeah,
It's not a supplier failure. Good.
100%,
Good.
100%. And I think quite honestly that we can take it to another level, right? It's not just this company's problem, it's this company's problem. It's a national issue. It really is affecting, again, going back to that idea of we have the safest food supply. And I think it was Corey who said it earlier. Where's the added part of, but we can do better?
Yeah.
That is where, as a nation, we truly take ownership for the fact that this is going on under our watch.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good way to kind of close out of our conversation as well. And thank you, everybody. Fantastic comments. I wish I could have got more on the screen. Let's use that Sprout example now. Let's say that as the head of food safety within the Sprout company, with its new technology that is producing safe sprouts, we are out there advocating publicly and showing the public how our sprouts are superior and how the sprouts help protect them. Think about the pressure that puts on the other sprout companies now to improve.
Yeah.
Now they have to. So
Yeah.
maybe that's the answer to this. I don't know. But as I think we can tell from this chat, is hopefully everybody's wheels are spinning, right, on how we can bring what we do more forward within the world, and showing people, right, food safety is not just an assumption. This is something that needs to be proactive and demonstrated. And the more that we can get out there in front of that, this is not something to just assume that it happens. This is something that takes serious engagement and work to make happen.
I'm laughing at the comments here. Duncan Lacey, I don't know if we're connected, but I've got to connect to you on LinkedIn because
Yeah, Duncan's awesome.
I'm really connecting with your posts. And Corey Muse, always so good to see you, and Felix and Austin, and thanks for joining the conversation. And I know it sounds like Darin speaking again. I always hope that when I talk, that I'm able to bring a new perspective or a new fold wrinkle into the ongoing saga that is around food safety. That there never seems to be an end of all the different angles we can talk about. And I think that as we continue to realize that, again, awareness, ally, advocate, activist, there's always a different take that people have on this topic.
Absolutely. So with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. So I have to bring our chat to a close. Thank you again, Dr. Detwiler. I love having you on these chats, and you're making a huge impact out there. And I'm sure everybody here on this chat agrees with me as well. Thank you for all that you do. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone on the call. I really appreciate it.
And with that, guys, we'll bring our chat to a close this week. Thank you for investing an hour of your week with us to join us in this chat and provide these fantastic comments. Love it. So next week, of course, we're going to be back here again next Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat. And we live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. So choose which platform works best for you. And in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. You've done a great job this week. We appreciate all you do. And we'll see you back here next week. So for Darin and myself, have a great time, everybody. Thanks again. And we'll see you back here next week. Have a good one.